What's up? Well, happy Thursday night. We are here for Across the Pitch for our third episode. I am Mike Barrera. You can see my Twitter handle right there, mbarrera1323, and I'm joined from across the pond with Dave. How you doing tonight, Dave?
I'm good, cheers. I had a pre-game nap just to make sure I'm 100% for the podcast. I'm looking forward to it.
As a parent, I'm very jealous that you got the nap today. That's an extreme jealousy for mine.
I mean, listen, it's a delicacy in itself. I think it's probably the first time I've napped voluntarily in about 2-3 years. So.
Well, it's funny for all people who, like I said, don't know. Dave is from England, so we're talking sometimes at 11 o'clock at night Eastern time. I'm like, isn't it 4 o'clock in the morning for you over there? He's like, yeah, I'll sleep 8 hours anyway. I'm like, what the? Yeah. That's too funny. Well, anyway, how you doing tonight? How are you feeling about the Union going into tonight?
I mean, obviously, I'll get on to it. A very topsy-turvy game from Saturday night against Chicago, but I think in general, feeling quite positive. Big game again this weekend against Nashville. We'll get on to that. Jim Curtin's comments as well during his press conference. There's plenty to talk about today.
Oh, yeah, there's a ton to talk about. But you're right. There's a lot to be excited about for this team. You're still unbeaten on the road coming into tonight. So let's get right into it. So the first thing, obviously, you're talking about the news and notes of the franchise so far. We always preach about the academy and how great the academy is. But right now, they're currently on a great run themselves. The MLS Next tournament is currently underway. And the U15 team is currently in the finals, which will be played tomorrow night at 7 p.m. So they defeated New England the other day 2-0, and Darbo, or Darobi, I believe is how you pronounce his name, had the brace there with 2 amazing goals of his own. So what are your thoughts on the academy so far based off their performances?
Well, I mean, obviously, it's a very good indication of where the future of the Union franchise is going as a whole. Again, the under-15s, and Jim Curtin alluded to it in his press conference. Watching them, it's like watching a mini Union team, and I think I put it in quotation marks. They're playing the Philadelphia Union way, which I think is always a good sign when you have that set style of play that is played through the entire team, from the first team down to the under-7s, under-8s. Again, it's a really good sign. Obviously, Bajan Darobe, as you said, the hero, 2 fantastic goals. He's also an under-17s and Union 2 regular as well. So again, that's a big name to watch out for in the future for the Union.
Yeah, you touched on it a bit there. I think what sometimes people don't realize, the non-Union fans who are kind of learning this academy way, is that the way the top team plays is pushed through to the bottom youth levels as well. They want everybody to play the same exact style, and they want to make it so that when they do reach the highest level, they already are accustomed to the Union way of doing things. But yeah, I mean, they brought him over from Minnesota back last year. Minnesota had closed their academy, so he was one of the highly touted prospects coming out of Minnesota. So the fact that the Union were able to bring him on, and then he goes down and puts on a performance like he did, which is absolutely spectacular. For one, his free kick was just beautiful with his right foot, and then he used his left foot to hit that nice goal at the top of the box. So it's really exciting to see what he can do as well as the other youth members can do. And I'm hoping that they do actually end up winning tomorrow night. Dave, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, the game's at 7, right? 7 p.m.?
I believe so.
I think so. Yeah, I think it's 7 p.m. So this will be the first trophy that they would win off a season trophy. They have done I have it in front of me, the Generation Adidas Cup title back in 2012 with Jim Curtin, actually. And they also won the U12 Generation Adidas Cup in 2019 with Kieberson, who was a former Union player. And then they had the U13 CONCACAF Champions League in 2018. So we have gotten youth trophies in the past. That's great, but this would be the first one for the MLS season for them, or the MLS next season. So it's a big, exciting moment for them. Another term of academy news, we have Tommy Wilson was promoted to the Director of Academy Professional Development. He's been with us since 2013, so it's nothing new for him entering this position and being with the franchise. So what are your thoughts on that, just from hearing that news?
Well, I mean, obviously, it's a very good indication for the franchise to have a guy that has been here since 2013. He's in a similar position to Curtin, where he's seen these players grow. He's seen players like Mark McKenzie, Brendan Aronson go from literally young boys turning into professional players, being able to go out to Europe. And he's sat with that development. And we're seeing this year the work that those guys with the academy have done, with Jack McGlynn, And players like Quinn Sullivan breaking into the first team and Paxton Harrison being on the fringes. I think it's a good. I think again, it's a good sign that the Union are happy with the way that things are going in the academy in the first team.
No, I completely agree, and I think the continuous group that they have in place is very important. Sometimes you see franchises consistently losing members, changing coaches, and they don't get that familiarity with the system or a way of doing things. So it's great now. Like you said, I said earlier, he's been with us since 2013, so 8 years now. He's been with us. Jim Curtin has been with us, for just almost as long, if not about the same amount of length of time. So it's great to see these head leaders of the organization staying with us and continuing to move forward. So that's awesome news for Tommy Wilson. I'm very happy for him and happy for the academy moving forward. Yeah. One question I had, I just asked you, 20, 30 minutes ago, was something that I saw online. And the question was, who is the most exciting young player in the MLS? So I'll keep it to the Union. Who do you think the most exciting young player for the Union is? Now, I'm not necessarily talking about who do you think the best young player is, but who do you think is the most exciting right now?
Obviously, there's a couple of big. Obviously, Quinn Sullivan's probably the easy answer to give there. Obviously,
the recency bias there.
Obviously, you could say the recency bias. The way that Jim Curtin's hyped him up in his press conference before the game, saying he could easily play in Europe, in a good league in Europe, to then back it up and score a bicycle kick in your first ever MLS start. Obviously, the excitement's there. I think Jack McGlynn can easily become a good player, but a solid midfielder in the MLS. I think a player I'm interested to see more is of Olivier Mbaiza. I think he's probably one of the more exciting players in his team. Yeah. He has the pace. He's a very forward-thinking player. And more of an under-the-radar sort of player, I feel.
That's a great. I didn't even think about him as one of those options, but you're absolutely right. I think you've seen him with Bedoya now paired together on the right side. He's getting better every single week, and I would agree. I feel like he does bring a sense of excitement to that position and to the right side of the pitch. Yeah. So I agree. I would say, for sure, a lot of people were excited about Paxton Harrison and see what he could do compared to his brother. I'm sure a lot of people are saying Paxton is right now the most exciting prospect, but we just haven't seen enough of him. So I would agree. Yeah. Mbaizo, Quinn Sullivan, players that bring a lot of excitement to the team currently and hopefully within the near future. So absolutely. So then we'll segue to the next section here. We want to talk about Jim Curtin's press conference today. You were fortunate enough to be in that press conference. So go right ahead. Take the lead here. What did the coach have to say today?
Well, I think it was a more of interesting. Well, the news conference that had, or press conference had more news than perhaps usual. Obviously, with the Gold Cup squads being officially announced, Copa America qualifying through to the next stage. Obviously, Venezuela got eliminated. There's injury news, not just ahead of the Nashville game, but going on and forwards, and also some CONCACAF Champions League updates as well. So I think if we start with the Gold Cup, I think that's probably the most recent thing that we'll be looking at. Yeah. And obviously, full Union players and concerned. Obviously, good news for us Union fans. Perhaps not good news for Leon Flark, but he has missed out on the US team. And from what it sounds like, I don't think he's going to be in one of the first reserves if there's an injury either. Yeah. He said that he had no contact with the American coaches. He hadn't heard anything from him regarding being a reserve. So he will be here during this big stretch going down the next 2 or 3 weeks. But obviously, Andre Blake, Corey Burke, and Alvis Powell will all be going off with the Jamaica team.
Yeah, I think selfishly speaking, I'm glad that Flock is staying with us. As you said, he's a very important part of the midfield. So in a way, I'm kind of glad he was snubbed off it. A lot of times you see players do better after they've been snubbed from an award or a call up to their national team. So, hopefully that makes, put some motivation into him to continue to play as well as he has. And I'm sure Leon Flock's name will be brought up again for the following Gold Cup and other national team call-ups. So the future is bright for him. But I think two of the bigger names here out of the four is obviously Andre Blake and Corey Burke. Corey is really playing at a high level. We said it at the Columbus game, how well he played. And in the Chicago game, he puts another one in the back of the net. He's currently playing at a high level. I would say he's playing significantly better than Sergio Santos right now. And he's kind of covering Casper as he's really been a little bit, actually, no, he had the goal the other day. But regardless, he's helping Casper with the load in terms of not being the only forward who's scoring. So between Blake and Burke, who do you think hurts us the most right now?
I think obviously it's got to be Andre Blake, because obviously one of the, or if not the best goalkeeper in the MLS. When you lose a player like that, we've seen so many teams when they lose their number one goalkeeper, sometimes things do get a bit dodgy in the back. You don't have that same trust with, say, with a Matt Freese or Joe Bendick that you do have with Andre Blake. So I think again it's going to be an interesting time for the Union. It's an interesting point that Jim made during the press conferences, that obviously with those three being involved in the Gold Cup, it's unlikely that they'll actually be available for next week's game against New York Rebels. From then onwards, they'll be away at the Gold Cup.
Yeah, that's a big loss. We had tastes of both Bendick and Freese last season. I would say majority of the Union faithful do not want to see Bendick starting in net. And Freese did it well. He actually stepped up and had a couple of nice moments there. So I mean, I have to ask you, who would you rather have between the two of them?
I think obviously they're both untested goalkeepers in terms of experience at the highest level, at the highest level in the MLS. So I think again it's going to be a free hit. It depends. We see it so often where goalkeepers are terrible or play very poorly. John runs when they're younger, and then when they do get a chance, some keepers just take a hold of it and then become very good goalkeepers, and they show what they actually have got. So I mean, obviously Bendick has struggled at times, but he could end up starting and being a very good goalkeeper and doing what Andre Blake has done, perhaps on the less level, and helping the Union with points. I've got trust in Jim Curtin to make the right decision, and I know he'll pick the right goalkeeper.
So last season, as they were pushing to get the supporter shield, I mean, they were obviously leading the way at the end of there, but there was some fear that they would lose that chance to win the trophy because of Bendick in net. And you're right, he did not play very well. They put Freese in. Jim decided to make that switch, and Freese played pretty solid. But games like the Atlanta United game in the CONCACAF, you will not have that first half that Blake did with either of those two guys.
Yeah.
And we've seen Blake make save after save after save. That is going to be lost with his absence. So it's a lot of pressure on the defensive line and the midfielders to really play at a high level, which, going back to your point about Leon Flock, having Flock available with us now is huge if you're not going to have Andre Blake back there. You need to have as many bodies in front of him that are familiar with each other as possible. Absolutely. Go ahead. Yep.
Obviously, it's a nice segue as well. As you mentioned, the CONCACAF Champions League. Obviously, the middle of August, the Union will be travelling to Mexico to play Club America. And Jim Curtin said that their preparations for that game have begun. They've begun to scout Club America, look at their players, watching film, and their pre-season's just begun. So now the Union can perhaps get some tape of pre-season games and, getting information of new signings, players going. So now it's going to be a busy time for them, not just in the MLS, but they're going to have one eye, or people like Ernest Tanner are going to have one eye on Club America and making sure that they're prepared, the utmost prepared for that CONCACAF Champions League semi-final.
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely going into uncharted waters, both playing in Mexico City as well as, playing an international team of that caliber. It's going to be a tough challenge for them. I would say both of us would be happy with a draw. If you can get out of Mexico with a draw, the sky's the limit when you come home, and then so be it. You don't want to go down there and get blown out, because it's just going to be an ugly return home. So it's exciting. It's only now about 5 weeks away, really. I think was the 12th, right, of August?
It's the 12th, yeah.
12th, okay. Yeah, he got 5 weeks to go. So, I know the CONCACAF and the MLS are two separate, entities, but the way you play in MLS can affect your mentality going into that big tournament over, across the border. So I'm hoping that they can put things together and go into that first leg of the game with some confidence. So
absolutely.
Yeah. Any other thoughts from Jim's presser that you wanted to? I know I mentioned on the notes earlier, Ilsinho making some progress. Anything else you want to touch upon that Jim said?
Obviously, as you said, Ilsinho is making great progress. He was training earlier today. Jim said he's ahead of schedule, looking very good on grass. So again, that's going to be big, getting a player like Ilsinho back, even if it's just him coming off the bench. It's that impact that you've got a player that's good in the ball, and you can match that with players like Gazdag and Montero. And obviously, Jose Martinez is back from the Copa America.
Yep.
Obviously, we'll discuss it again later on in the show when we just preview the Nashville game. but he will be available for Saturday's game.
Now, Jim mentioned a couple things with Martinez. Obviously, he's happy to have him back, but his club team or his national team used him a bit differently than we do. So it was Jim has talked about how he was intrigued by it and maybe using Martinez in a different role now with the Union. So with Bedoya a bit hampered with his injury, he missed last game. He's obviously one of the older players on the squad. Having Martinez be a little more versatile now and some experience with that versatility is huge for this club, especially if you're missing Blake, especially if you're missing Burke. So it's good. I cannot wait to have Martinez back. I'm sure he's going to get a yellow card probably in his first match because it's Jose Martinez. What do you expect? But with Ilsinho, did he give us a timeline at all when he thinks he could be back in full play?
No, there was no timeline or senior. We just said he's looking good. He's ahead of schedule, training well. So maybe that's a name to look out for on the team sheets in the coming weeks. Again, I think that's pretty much everything from Jim's press conference that doesn't entirely concern the Nashville game. We'll look at some of his comments on injury news in the when we preview the Nashville game a bit later.
Yep.
Obviously, there was a big game again, obviously, at the weekend, which we were watching.
I would say there are some games that you have, like the Chicago game, that is stressful from the minute the game starts to the minute ends. I mean, there are some games that are just like the Portland game was just a relaxing, fun game. It was fun to tweet out, and I felt like Chicago. I was constantly tweeting. I was constantly trying to just keep up with the pace of the game. One of the questions you have on your agenda right off the bat is this a game of the season candidate? What do you think on that? Over under on the minutes. Here you go. Here's a good question from Eric. What's the over under on the minutes until Martinez gets his next yellow? What do you go, Dave? Now he's not saying this coming game. Is the next yellow? Is it going to be next game, this coming game, and how many minutes?
I think it depends whether he starts. If he starts this game, it could easily be 25, 30 minutes.
I like it. I think 25, 30 minutes if he starts is probably a pretty good number.
Obviously, again, on the road in Nashville as well, it'll be a bit of a hostile environment. The referee could crumble under a foul. So again, that could be something for you bettors out there. Jose Martinez to be carded.
And we will talk about the betting side of Nashville and going there in a minute. But I still want to talk about Chicago. Dave, your thoughts? Game of the season candidate so far, Chicago versus Union.
It's definitely up there as one of the games. I think there was another very good game at the weekend, which we'll look at later, which was the Orlando versus Inter Miami game, which seemed quite an interesting game. But that game was just back and forth. The Union Chicago game, obviously a horrible own goal for Glasner's in the first 90 seconds. I don't think anyone could believe that it happened. I think you look up and you just see the ball looping over Andre Blake going over his head into the back of the net. Couldn't believe it.
I mean, it's probably one of the prettiest own goals you'll ever see. It was just like the field was absolutely terrible. I mean, I can't remember the last time I watched a Chicago Bears game in the rain. So maybe this is common for Soldier Field, but it was absolutely terrible.
No, it was like pitch. A swamp.
It was like a swamp. I mean, you saw players just sliding around, the water's flying up everywhere. It was not a pretty sight. And Jim kind of mentioned this in terms of the scheduling. They had the scheduling for this game. Obviously, at that point, they had played 3 games in 7 days, which is, for non-soccer fans, a very tough schedule to play. And then you mix that in with the pitch and how poorly it was, or poorly it was drained. It really wasn't drained at all.
No.
You run a very high risk of injury. So I'm glad they were able to get out of that basically unscathed. But we've had 2 own goals now in the last 3 games. 2 of the 3 games we've had own goals. Any concern on your part for them, or is it just kind of like a fluke?
I think it's more of a fluke. I think the bigger concern is that they've now conceded 5 goals in 2 road games. That's the big concern.
Yes, that is the bigger concern. So I had looked at the Nashville and the Union preview, just to see the numbers that they had on ESPN, and I believe the goals given up from the Union were about 10 or so far. Yeah. But half of that was the last 2 games.
2 games.
So, go ahead.
So if you look at the start of the season, they played 5 games away from home and didn't concede a single goal. So to then go and concede 5 in 2 games is obviously quite concerning from Jim's point of view. Maybe not a change of tactics, maybe teams are starting to realise how to play against the Union at home. So maybe Jim might need to tweak that a bit, mate, so it doesn't get a bit stale. So when teams know how to prepare for the Union. But I think, again, obviously, it was a back and forth game. In the end, I think in the conditions, they did well to come away with the point.
Well, I think you mentioned one thing, how to attack the Union, right? So you gave up 2 goals in Atlanta. You gave up 3 goals in Chicago, okay? You had 2 own goals, one by Casper, one by Glesnes, right?
Yeah.
So let's just take those off the board, right? It's a fluke own goal. The problem with the way the teams are scoring right now against them, and we've already seen this problem, we had the problem against the Red Bulls, is the set pieces.
Set pieces, yeah.
We had 12 set pieces against the Red Bulls. Luckily, we won that game 1-0, but it could have easily been a 1-1 game, right? Then you have Corey Burke losing his man in Atlanta, leads to the 2-0 lead from Atlanta. And then you have Leon Flock and you have Mumbaisa losing their man in the box and 2 goals against Chicago. So as good as the Union are playing on set pieces, and they're scoring, as you saw in Portland, 3 goals on set pieces, their defense is not holding strong.
No.
In free kicks or corner kicks. And if you don't have Blake back there, that becomes a huge, huge factor. So what are your concerns on that? Or what have you seen from them on the set pieces?
It's the schoolboy errors. It should be simple defending. I mean, the second goal they conceded against Chicago was terrible from Leon Flock. In that sort of situation, you just go with your man. Even if your goalkeeper is going to come and claim it, or if you think another defender is going to come around and cover it, you still go with your man. You still have the obligation. Yeah. The fact that I think it was Sekulic, whatever his name was able to move pretty much through the Union defensive line untouched to get to the ball. Schoolboy from Leon Flock, but obviously he's still 20 years old, so he'll learn. But it's shocking defending.
Yeah, it's you want to see the chemistry between the defensive players and Blake. So I don't know if maybe he heard something from Blake or if he heard something else that may have caused him to stop. He did just kind of stop suddenly. But regardless, you're absolutely right. You are playing a set piece. You do not lose your man until you're absolutely certain that you're being called off the ball. So it's upsetting because on one hand, you're very happy that you had a makeshift lineup and you came out of there with a point. At the same time, you basically shot yourself in the foot 3 consecutive goals to put yourself into the position where you could not come out there with a win because they were leading at one point. They were up 2-1 when Corey Burke scores that goal. Yeah. The only reason why they lost that freaking game is because they blew pieces. So it's concerning, like you mentioned before. But kind of segueing off the bat a little bit here, there is a good goal to talk about. The Quinn Sullivan goal was absolutely perfection. I don't know. We're trying to get video to show on this. I don't know if Mike can get this video up for the Quinn Sullivan goal. We'll see in a second if it does.
But I didn't expect him to do that. First start in MLS for the Union. And I tell you what I'm going to do, I'm going to make my first start and I'm going to introduce myself by trying an audacious finish into the far corner. And what an outstanding finish that is. No goalkeeper's going to save that. That's absolutely brilliant from Sullivan.
Yeah. I mean, to do that at 17 years old is I think the thing that's the most shocking of everything. That he saw the ball coming. Say, hey, you know what? I'm just going to bicycle this for my first goal. I mean, what were your thoughts as soon as you saw that go in?
I couldn't believe it. I mean, obviously, the corner came in. I thought, okay, the ball's come across. Okay, someone's going to attack this here. And then to see him, I mean, he could have easily headed the ball, could have easily brought it down and had a shot. But to have the balls to do that at 17 years old when the MLS debut was just incredible. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. When he just, I mean, I think I said to you, I just literally sat there. I was gobsmacked. I couldn't believe he'd done it. And after going from the week before, seeing Glesnes saying, screw it, I'm just going to go twat one in from 40 yards, then scoring a bicycle kick.
Yeah.
Incredible.
So it's just, I guess the equivalent of this in terms of basketball would be to be like taking it from half court and shooting from the logo is the confidence level you have to have a bicycle kick. Especially at that age. Like you said, as soon as I was watching the game with you and we were chatting and stuff like that, as soon as I saw the goal go in, I kind of paused. I was like, wait, Did he just do that? Is that really what happened right now? And you could see the reaction from Santos, from Miro, from Jack Elliott. They were like, "Holy crap!"
Yeah.
And actually, it was I had it's something that JP said on the telecast was that he was the youngest player to ever score a Union goal.
Yeah.
So not only does he get his first MLS start, not only does he get his first MLS goal, but he's the youngest player in franchise history to do it. It was absolutely remarkable. But a little bit more of Quinn Sullivan. You and I had talked about this the previous game when he came in, about how we liked how he was confident, he was aggressive. Right off the bat, he kind of wins the ball in the corner, and it ends up being a corner kick. In this particular situation, that ball had been driven into play. It came to him, and he ended up settling and taking a shot, which was ricocheted off into the corner, which led to the corner kick to give him that chance. So, aside from the goal, what have you seen from Quinn in terms of the way he's handling the ball and his confidence level while he has the ball at his feet?
I mean, obviously, it was a difficult game for you to come in and, sort of mentally prepare yourself. Obviously, it was a raucous crowd, but it's a big stadium. Soldier Field is one of the biggest stadiums in America, so obviously that's quite daunting in itself. Then for him, and it's horrible conditions as well. If you're making your debut or your first start, you always want the pitch to be nice. You want it to be lovely turf, not for the ball when it bounces to literally just stick to the ground. I thought he looked composed on the ball. Obviously, there were some iffy moments where perhaps he could have released the ball sooner. But again, he's a young player. He's 17 years old. So I'm looking forward to hopefully seeing a bit more from him, either when it's this week, maybe it's next week when they're a few men down against New York. I'm looking forward to seeing more. Obviously, we'll get on to the Nashville game regarding the Jamaican players, because Jim might use them to get the legs out of them before they go off 2 to 3 weeks.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. I think I can't remember which announcer had said this on the show, on during the game rather. But once he scores that goal, he did have more of a confidence to him. You could see him kind of calling for the ball, trying to make himself more of a presence. So maybe he already looked confident to begin with, but now having that goal under his belt, he got the first one out of the way. Hopefully he can continue to play at a high level. The second great goal of the night was the Corey Burke goal. Glessens gets his first MLS assist on top of that. And it was it was a great strike by Corey, but it was kind of lazy defense to begin with. The ball doesn't get cleared out of the zone. Glessens just kind of chucks it in there into the box, and Corey just takes care of business from there. What was your reaction to the Corey Burke goal?
I was worried. From the way it looked, I thought it was offside originally. I thought, oh no, it might have strayed offside, but he did well to hold his run and get in there. So I enjoyed a good finish across the goalkeeper to give him much of a chance. And again, that's what we've seen more from Corey Burke this year, perhaps that we didn't see the last time we played for the Union. That more confidence on the ball. He's more bullish. He's prepared to take the risks and, create chances. I think all in all, a positive night for the Union on attack. Shabirko's goal as well. Yeah. He did really well to chase down what looked like to be a dead ball. Got off a great shot, which would have been a screamer of a finish had the keeper not been just a great save. But we'll take the own goal.
Yeah, no, it was great to see, like you mentioned, Corey making more of a presence, and Casper goes out. And at first, the Chicago defender had went down after the Casper had passed him, was like kind of calling for a foul. I thought he was going to be called for a foul. Luckily, the whistle stayed silent. But it is weird. You start the game with an own goal, and then you end it with just a ricochet off a Chicago defender into the net. But that's what Casper does. He will play hard the entire match, and he'll put himself in position to score goals. I mean, and Jim has mentioned this previously. Like, Casper works extremely hard to put himself into position to make himself known into set pieces, to make himself a prominent point in the offense. So it's great to see him he came off as a sub too. He hadn't been playing the whole game. He came as a sub. Santos and Burke had started that game. So many people last season thought Casper should have been benched and should have just been done with. And to see him not only do well at times last season, but to continue to score goals at the rate he is now, it's great to see from him. And hopefully we see more from him scoring goals in the future, especially with Corey Burke gone.
Oh, absolutely. I think.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, before we move on to our MLS chat with my friend Sam, who's also from across the pond, can we talk about a couple of individual performances?
Yep.
Stuart Finley made his first start for the Union, and he was the best player on that pitch by a country mile. Looked fantastic all night, reassured at the back. He didn't let anything get past him. He intercepted loose balls. He stepped in and made good challenges. Jim Curtin has a selection headache ahead of him now ahead of this game going into this, because I think Finley put in that. I mean, everyone will look and go, "Oh, the Union conceded 3 goals, or can't put in that good." 2 awful set pieces and an own goal. Finley couldn't do anything about any of those. When he had to do his job, he did them, and I think he could have a selection headache ahead of the game on Saturday night.
So yeah, you read my mind there in terms of who performed at the highest level on the Chicago game, and you're right. Finley mentioned in his press conference, and he was asked about this as well. How did it feel to make your first MLS start? How does it feel so far leading up to this? And he has not played. I mean, he really hasn't been needed to, because you have Jack and Jacob playing at such a high level together. Yeah. You don't want to break them up. But he mentioned, always being prepared, always being ready to rock and roll and just go in there and to do your job. So I thought he did well, like you mentioned. I thought he played great. The 3 goals, and he mentioned this as well in the press conference. You look at your first MLS start and you think, oh, we gave up 3 goals, but that's just very much on face value. If you look at the game in depth and you watched him play and you watched how the goals were scored, you could see he was not involved in any of the goals being scored against him. So I want to see him used. What's up, Jason? I want to see him used the same way we did last year with Jack and Jake, kind of rotating, seeing who fits the best matchup. Can we give Jacob a rest? Can we give Jack a rest? And seeing what we can, how much he can contribute moving forward. Especially, like you said, with some of the Gold Cup and injury missed others. But any other individual performances that might have, sparked your interest from that game?
Not really, no. I think, obviously, we mentioned Corey Burke, mentioned Quinn Sullivan, mentioned Stuart Finley, obviously.
Albus Powell, yes, yay or nay on his performance? Yeah, that's my answer. It's kind of what I'm
great.
Going with. It wasn't
horrible
great.
Horrible pitch, I'd say. I mean, every single cross he tried to put in the box just skidded across the ground, the wet turf. So hopefully, maybe better conditions, he might play better.
I thought he just kind of looked a bit just mentally off. Like he had one pass on the right side in the first half where he turned around and just passed it and went right to the Chicago defender. I'm thinking, like, you're not paying attention, or you're not seeing the ball well. Something's a little bit off. He just didn't look that confident at times. I mean, he's still a very valuable player in the terms of the depth role. So I want to see him get more time with a steady rotation, with the backups, or maybe just a better pitch, like you said. But I want to see more. Actually, I forgot to ask you regarding Jim Curtin. Did he mention anything about Kai Wagner and his hand at all, or no?
No, it was never brought up. It wasn't on the injury report.
So right after the first goal, the own goal, Kai goes sliding to the sideline, and he comes up with a bandaged hand that the trainer had on him. And you saw after the first half, he had a larger bandage on it. So I wasn't sure if he broke something or whatnot. But luckily in soccer, you don't have to use your hands that much. So no. I guess it doesn't matter too much. But anyway, let's segue into the next piece and bring Sam on. So, Mike, if you could bring him into the discussion. Here we go.
See you, Mr. Tiller.
Hey, Sam. How you doing today?
Thank you for having me on. It's nice to meet you, Mike, and obviously I know Dave. As Dave said, it's been a good podcast so far, guys. Well done. As Dave said, I also had a nap before I came on because it's almost 2 a.m. England time here. So
Apparently, I have to move to England because that's where the naps are happening. Because down in Jersey, nobody's getting sleep in Jersey. But listen, Sam, I appreciate you joining the show. Dave has kind of talked to me about you so far about what you do. So if you could kind of share a brief, description of what you do in terms of MLS and your experience with this league.
Cool. Well, I'm actually a fairly recent convert to MLS. I only properly started watching it this year. But I sort of first came across it last year when we all were stuck inside and had nothing to do. And I was just quite intrigued by it because obviously you think football or soccer, you don't really think America as such. It's not one of the big four sports. But I kind of fell in love with it, despite there being some very questionable decisions about having an odd number of teams in the league and 2 conferences. But no, honestly, this season I've probably started watching it. Dave has kind of pressured me into being a Union fan for the past year.
Good job, Dave. Good job.
I've enjoyed. I mean, I've chosen a good time to start by the sound of it. The last 2 seasons have been pretty good. But yeah, no, that's me. I'm just sort of enjoying the ride, as it were.
Now, so for me, I've always been, more MLS based because of the Union being so close to home for me. But for an outsider coming in with your experience with the international side of football, what is the biggest difference between MLS and the international, besides like the level of play? But is there anything in particular that's glaring that you're like, wow, this is nothing like the Premier League?
I think it's youth. The emphasis on youth in America is striking when you compare it to England. I think my football team in England is Wolverhampton Wanderers, and the academy. There's almost no link between the academy and the first team. But you come to America, and as you were talking earlier about the academy, the amount of players that currently play for the Union that have not only played for the Union, but they've gone abroad. I believe we've got a couple of graduates in Portugal, in Austria, and it's striking at how much emphasis you place on youth, and I think it's worked. You look at the new breed of American players coming through. You've got Pulisic is probably the obvious. But it's worked, and it's something I'd quite like to see back here.
Yeah.
With the new, obviously you might have heard a little thing called Brexit, but that with the new rules on football and the Premier League on Brexit, it means that we will also probably have to start looking towards youth. So
now you mentioned, go ahead. Sorry, you mentioned bringing the youth back to that side of the football. Is there a reason why in particular they've kind of gone off the youth, or can you kind of share some insight as to why it's not the same as America for those people who don't know the difference between that? You're showing the money right there.
Money.
It is primarily money, and also, I mean, me and Dave are very lucky now in supporting England that we've got a really strong group of young players. But traditionally, that hasn't really been the case for the past couple of decades or so. And so there's been an emphasis on buying abroad, which, it has done well. I mean, the Premier League is the best league in the world, I think.
Yes.
A large part of that is because you get the world's best players.
Yeah.
At the same time, you look at the big clubs, your Chelseas, your Arsenals. In the last decade or so, there was absolutely no, I think at one point, I think Chelsea had about 40 players out on loan that were just young players from their academy. They just couldn't get anywhere near the first team. So I think the main thing that America does well, I think, is that it sounds corny, I know, but it almost provides the whole experience when you're in an academy. You don't just go to an academy for a weekend or for a day's training. I think you base yourself there. Your life becomes the academy, and I think it works. It works really well. Yeah,
the Union have really emphasized putting the money into the academy, which some people say, well, use that money to buy a top level international player, use that money for other things. Well, if you can build top players in your academy, then it serves the same purpose. And you saw that with Brendan Aronson when he got sent to Red Bulls, and you see that with McKenzie as well. Sometimes MLS fans or maybe new Union fans don't understand why it's important for the MLS teams to have a strong academy and to sell overseas. How important it is for the brand. Dave, you and I have talked about this recently. If you have an MLS program that has a strong reputation on building and developing youth, you will have players from overseas coming to the MLS because of that youth development program. So I think you touched on that perfectly. It's like I said, for me, I'm relatively new to the international scene. I'm much more MLS, so it's great to hear your insight on that. But you're here to talk MLS. So what are your thoughts so far on the season, and what have you seen so far from either the Union or other teams in the league?
Well, I have to admit, going into the season, I was kind of skeptical. Last year was a weird one. I think the huge gaps, pandemic. I didn't expect too much, but I've been pleasantly surprised at how well teams have adapted this season. I've watched a fair few matches, probably too many matches over the last few weeks. On the whole, I don't think that. Okay, there's more two teams which I'll come on to later, which I think probably riding their luck a bit. But on the whole, it's been good quality football, and you've seen that, especially 3-3 the weekend. Yeah, that was a great one. The Florida derby as well, which again I'll touch on later. But overall, I think it's been a strong outfit for the MLS.
Yeah. Last year was weird. I mean, Dave, we played the New England Revolution like 7 times last year, which is unheard of. Obviously, because of the pandemic, and there is, I guess some people say there's an asterisk on last season because it wasn't a regular season, but you kind of just have to play who you're, put up against.
Yeah.
There's nothing the Union or anyone else could have done. If we win the Supporter Shield because of it, then so be it. But so far, yeah, it's been an interesting season so far. You mentioned a couple teams that are maybe playing better than they're actually, able to do long term. I kind of really curious to see what teams you're talking about there.
Well, there's the best candidate, I think, is Inter Miami, who,
Okay.
On the weekend they played Orlando, so it's a rare interstate clash.
Mm-hmm.
And the first half they came out and they looked a good side, and then as soon as halftime hit, a different Inter Miami came out, and it was a bloodbath. I don't understand it. They're coached by Phil Neville, who Dave knows my opinions of Phil Neville. He was the England women's team manager before making the trip to MLS, and I just don't think he's strong enough a manager. Obviously, Miami are owned by David Beckham.
Yes.
And I definitely wouldn't want to go on record and say that there's any nepotism involved there in hiring Phil Neville. But you look at how his team lines up in the second half and how his team reacted to going behind against, admittedly, a strong Orlando side. I think Orlando have probably been my team of the last few weeks. Personally, they've been strong. They had that 5-0 walloping a couple of weeks ago, and they came from behind to beat Miami this time out. But I think Inter Miami are definitely a team that I think are flattered to deceive, especially when you consider the players they've got. They've got Gonzalo Higuain, who was, one of Europe's leading strikers. He's far too good for that team. And it does almost sort of, as I said, flatter to deceive that they're doing so well.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because we saw Inter Miami not too long ago, and the Union and Miami have kind of built a bit of a rivalry between each other. They don't really like each other that much, especially Higuain and Jose Martinez. They got into a scuffle last season, and obviously this season they were chirping again on the pitch. I was actually there for the game. I was hoping we could see more drama between them this time around, but we had them beat in Chester. I think we were up 1-0, and then they come back and they end up taking that game in front of their home crowd. But I wasn't impressed by them, like you mentioned. It wasn't anything that I was really blown away by. But Orlando is a team that is currently sitting in second place. They have 21 points. They're right behind New England, who has 23. You touched about Orlando briefly. What are your thoughts on them so far from what you've seen?
They're a very strong, capable side. In terms of attacking options, I think they're probably one of the league's best. You've got Daryl Dike, who I think has scored about 3 in the past 2 games or something.
And he was on loan at Barnsley in the Championship, and England was scoring goals from.
In the Championship, which is the weirdest MLS collection this week, I think. And then obviously you've got Nani, who obviously played for Man United, big player. He's pretty much won everything he can in Europe, and he was absolutely bossing that game. And I try every week to sort of identify my goal of the week, and it wasn't for Quinn Sullivan ruining my prediction at the beginning. Nani's second goal against Inter Miami was
that was very impressive. I agree. I mean, I had to vote for Quinn Sullivan regardless, but I agree. I think that was a very, very close second, if not snubbed for the first. But I mean, Dave, just what are your thoughts on Orlando? Have you seen anything from them in particular that kind of piqued your interest? I think he's spot on there. I think they're a dangerous club.
I mean, if you've looked at the jump they made from this season in comparison to last year, where they were perhaps not as strong as the side, we saw them in the MLS Cup or the MLS's back cup last year when they did do all right. To be fair, they played quite well in the group stages, and the Union actually drew with them, and they look quite a solid team. Obviously, Nani, as Sam mentioned, is a player that's done everything at the highest level. So he's one of the examples of the bigger players coming over from Europe that have actually taken accustomed to the league. Because as we mentioned before we came into looking at the Inter Miami game, look at the the teams that have brought in these big players that, Higuain's placed for Tweedy at Inter Miami, and these other teams that have brought in big names, and they just haven't worked out. They haven't done anything for that team. Inter Miami have been poorly run. They brought in too many players, but they got fined and punished for it. They haven't had the impact they hoped they would. Obviously, they signed that Rodolfo Pizarro, who's one of the leading players, who was probably the leading player in Mexico. He's not had the desired impact he would have had. Whereas perhaps Orlando, as you see, they're working well. They've obviously brought through academy players like Daryl Dike, who's still young. He's obviously on the books for America. He's 21 years old. Do you know what I mean they're going through things the right way, and not perhaps the union path, but they're going to have having players like Daryl DK, who's already made waves in England, is clearly going to perhaps giving them an advantage for English players coming over or European players coming over in the future.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's same. I know, there's such a close group right now in the Eastern Conference between first and, even eighth. They're only separated by 10 points total. So there's a lot of close, teams fighting for a playoff spot there. Any other team in the Eastern Conference in particular that you think would be a threat to the Union, or another team that you think could make a run within the next couple of weeks?
It's a tricky one. I think I've got my eye on Columbus Crew, really.
Okay.
Not for any sort of mathematical reason. I just think, I watched a bit of their game last week, and it wasn't a great game. It was 0-0.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you could kind of see they had the potential there, and it's a close league. I think next week they play. Who do they play next? I think they might play New England actually. That's a big game out there. And
yeah, they play New England on Saturday, the 3rd.
Yeah, and I just have a sneaking suspicion they might cause an upset there. New England, they lost on the weekend to a not great Dallas side. So it's open, the Eastern Conference this year more than any. Obviously, we will hope the Union manage to sneak through, but you said any of those top 5, I think, could definitely make a tilt.
Yeah, New England was not a team that we really were afraid of last season. And when we found them in the playoffs, we were like, we beat them 6 times. We shouldn't have a problem with New England at all. And then they come in here to Chester, and we, thankfully Casper was able to squeak a header into the net and make it 1-1. But they were winning the entire game, essentially, against us. And we were fortunate to get that point. And Dave and I had mentioned this on the first week of the show. Getting that point against New England was huge, not only because New England is currently at the top of the table, but they just look good. They're tough. You want to be able to earn a point against a tough team like that and say, okay, at least we got one, and now the point means a lot more now with how well they're playing. But we've seen teams like the Union who have been on the top of the table, and then a break comes along, or the wheels start falling off. So it's certainly. You're hoping as a Union fan that eventually those wheels for New England do fall off, because last season they really were not what they are right now. So it's a lot to keep an eye on. But how about Nashville? We're playing Nashville on this weekend. Have you noticed them at all, or anything particular from Nashville that kind of caught your eye before this upcoming game?
Well, no, not really. It's been kind of a strange one, but Nashville I haven't really seen much of. You don't really hear much about them. They're not, they're not league leaders. I think they're just 6th, aren't they?
Yeah, they're in 6th place right now. They're 4 points behind the Union currently.
Yeah,
they just drew their 1-1 game against Montreal.
Yeah, and it's just strangely, obviously, the way that the TV rights work in England is that obviously we only get, I think it's 2 or 3 games per game week. Yeah. And for some reason, they don't seem to like Nashville very much. I haven't been able to catch much of them. But, they're a strong defensive team. I can certainly see them having a go. It's a big game week this week. Union Nashville is 3rd v 6th. New England Columbus is 1st v 5th. But the table could be completely overturned. The other team we haven't talked about, of course, is New York City FC.
Yes. Yes. What have you seen from them so far?
Well, I have mixed feelings about them, about their existence, actually.
Welcome to the club.
They're part of the City Football Group. Which obviously is run by people behind Manchester City. They've got clubs all over the world. They've got clubs in Australia and Uruguay, India, and this is basically Man City America. And I don't know. I'm not sure I agree with it. The same extends to the Red Bulls. We've seen this week that Caden Clark, the winger for the New York Red Bulls, he's hopping over to Leipzig, and I'm not sure. I'm not sure it's a level playing field. When you have these franchise teams, to a lesser extent, you've got Colorado Rapids, of course, who are owned by the same people behind Arsenal and is it the Broncos in NFL?
The Rams.
Yeah.
The Rams, that's it.
Okay.
I'm not very good at my other American sports.
But
I think it's a little bit corporate.
Uh-huh.
New York City don't. I know there's a lot of stadium sharing, but they just don't seem very. They don't seem like a club. They seem like a branch of Man City.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the stadium, and I'm going to talk about NYCFC because their stadium, they play in Yankee Stadium.
Mm-hmm.
They play in a shoebox, basically.
It's awful. Yeah.
It is awful. It literally looks terrible. On TV, I'm sure even worse in person. Do you guys have anything like that overseas where there's a football team playing in such a small arena like that?
The only close comparison I can think of is that a football team in the lower league might ground share for a couple of seasons. But in terms of that, England is a nation of football, nation of soccer. It's you have rugby stadiums, you have big rugby stadiums that hold anywhere between 50 to 60,000 people. But we don't have the full sports. You've got baseball, you've got American football, you've got soccer. I can kind of see why, because if I was in charge of a city, I wouldn't want 3 stadiums that could hold 40,000 people. But I don't know. Yeah, you're kind of looking at England, and if there's a stadium, the likelihood is that that's going to be a football stadium.
Yes,
they're all built for football.
Well, see, that's the thing. So for New York City, it's obviously such a congested area. There's not much green space there to build a city or to build a stadium. So the Red Bulls play in New Jersey, the Jets and the Giants, they play in New Jersey. So I understand why they don't have a stadium, but you go up there and you try to play a game, and it's just not good for the game as a whole. It gives the away team such a disadvantage in terms of just being able to play their game in such a tight quarters. And Eric mentioned on the comments, if Mike can bring that up, he hates NYCFC just as much as he hates the Red Bulls, and I completely agree. There's something about them that just kind of is a thorn in our side for years now. But going back to the Nashville game a bit, they play very strong at home overall. They don't really lose. They will either draw or they will win. And it's more so the draw aspect. If I was looking at a sportsbook line off the game, and it has Philadelphia plus 279 and Nashville at plus 100, the draw at plus 236. So I feel like the books are leaning towards a draw, if not at least a Nashville win. Talk about playing over there for the Union. How do you think they'll do against a team they've never played before? What is your experience with teams playing a team they've just never seen before?
Yeah, again, it's kind of strange. You don't really get that in international football because in the MLS, which is a good thing, they're expanding and new teams are coming in.
Yeah.
Time. In England, everyone who comes up to the Premier League has basically been around the Premier League. You've got certain clubs. I know, for instance, in the MLS, they don't have relegation, which does annoy me. Actually, I have to admit. It means that the San Jose Earthquakes get away with being awful every year. But it's a very distinctly American phenomenon. But, you do have teams that you don't play before. Probably the closest comparison is international continental football. When you've got a team perhaps in the European, the Europa League or the Champions League in Europe. I don't know. It's a strange one. It's weird. It doesn't really have many comparisons in international football, especially as the teams that you're likely to never played before. I think. Having said that, I think in the Premier League next year there is a team that has never been in the Premier League before.
There you go.
Brentford.
Now, from the international side,
it's really interesting.
And now, how do you think that will be over there for the Premier League, having a team like that come into it that nobody's seen before? How do you think they'll fare against the competition?
It's tricky because in the past 3 seasons, a newly promoted team has done quite well. In 2018, Wolves, my own team, we went up. We came 7th that year. People just didn't know how to play against us. The following year, Sheffield United came up for the first time.
Who were heavily tipped to be relegated.
Heavily tipped to be relegated, ended up top half. And this year was a little bit different, I think, because no fans. And there's quite a tradition in England. We call them yo-yo clubs, which are clubs that go up and down and up and down and up and down. There's no stability. A prime example is a club called Fulham, who are owned by the same people that own the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Speaking of up and down franchises, right there, the Jacksonville Jaguars, just terrible. But yeah, go ahead.
And yeah, these are clubs that they come up, they spend 50 million on new players, they don't gel, they have an awful season, they go back down, they sell those players, go back up again, then use the money they got by selling the players to buy new players. It's ludicrous. I don't know how it's sustainable. But you get Fulham, prime example. They came up a couple of years ago and bought 4 goalkeepers. I mean,
Wow.
it wasn't like they were buying a first choice goalkeeper and a backup. They bought 4 first choice goalkeepers, top quality goalkeepers. It was very strange. So when you have these teams that come up to the Premier League, especially the big teams, if you're Man City or Man United or Liverpool, and you've comfortably be able to put 3 past Real Madrid, 3 past Juventus, and then you go to Brentford, and suddenly they're playing 6 at the back, proper tackling. Really
Yes, true.
It's strange for teams, and with Nashville in particular, I think they've definitely been the beneficiaries of that this season.
Yeah, it's weird, thinking of how they're going to compete against Nashville. I mean, Dave, you're Jim Curtin this week. What do you tell this team about the game plan or the lineup? How do you approach a team that you've never seen before?
That's obviously a weird one because they were playing in the Western Conference last year, which obviously means that the Western Conference is now 1 team down. We'll move on to, after we've discussed this, we'll move on to the Western Conference because I know Sam has some strong feelings about a couple of teams in the Western Conference. We can look at a couple of those teams. But again, it's going to be, I think you just sort of have to relay the same message you do every week. You prepare the right way. It doesn't matter who this team are. We're going to treat them like they're the best team in the league. Mm-hmm. It will be a tough task, which it will be. And as Jim said in his press conference earlier today, they are a good team. He's expecting a tough battle. They're a very good team at the back. They're very good defensively, but they will offer the Union a tough task with their attack. So, again, I think you just got to prepare for it like you do every other game. You might not have played them before, but you've got the tape on them. You can see who the key players are. You can see how they play, how they line up. That's the beauty of modern day technology, isn't it? Where you have all these facilities and all this technology that allows you to know how these teams play. So again, just prepare for it in a normal way.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the players that we do have some familiarity with is CJ Sapong. We should be seeing him with Nashville. I was not the biggest CJ fan, but he did have some great moments for us overall. What are your initial thoughts hearing his name coming back playing against the Union?
Well, obviously, he was sort of around one of the bigger names around when I first started watching the Union. So he's one of the players that I probably have a fonder memory on because I started watching when I think he had probably his best season as a Union player. Mm-hmm. Again, Sapong is a very up and down striker. I'm not sure if he scored this year, actually. Have a quick look.
I can tell you right now, he has, if my phone will ever load, he has 1 goal so far and assist.
1 goal. There you go. Let's see Sapong in a nutshell.
Yeah, that seems right.
Right. He'll either score plenty of goals or he won't score at all. So, I mean, again, I'm looking forward. Obviously, I think it'd be nice to see Sapong come back and obviously reunite with old teammates. Last year, looking at Sapong's record, he scored 13 goals last year. Well, in 2019, during the last full season. So, again, he's a very up and down striker. Hopefully, we're not on the receiving end of a very good CJ Sapong performance of the weekend. Hopefully, he can carry on his current form.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you guys have kind of touched on it already. The Union are a team of that are a true contender in the MLS right now. And when you are a team of that caliber, you are able to control the game to the way you play. And Jim has voiced that over and over and over. You go and you play every team with your style, and you impose your will based off your style. So I'm sure that's going to be echoed again this week. And I'm sure if something happens, that Jim will make his adjustment as needed. But you have to go in there, play your game. If you try to play to their style, you are going to end up being disappointed by your performance overall. So I think all you guys kind of nailed it on the head right there with how they should approach the game. Any predictions so far, Sam? Any prediction on the game or what you're hoping that the Union pull out in terms of a point or 3 points?
I think a point would be a good result. Okay. You touched earlier on the podcast. We've had a problem the last couple of weeks of shipping goals.
Yeah.
And Nashville, as you said, they're not a team you go and you expect to score 3. So I think we're going to have to be really tight at the back. I hope we don't have a really bizarre own goal. I was tempted to make the Glesner's own goal of the week because it was beautiful.
It was it was really nice.
Looped right over.
But yeah, if you force me into making a score, I'd say an optimistic 1-0 for the Union.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Dave, how about yourself? Anything jumps out to you there?
But I mean, obviously, there's going to be some positive news on the injury front heading into this game. Obviously, you mentioned earlier in the podcast, Jose Martinez will be back for the game, whether it's coming off the bench or if he does somehow start. Bedoya will be fit. It looks like he apparently got through training. Was reacted positively in training today. Looked good, so he should be fit. Anthony Fontana's still in concussion protocol, so he will miss the game, and hopefully he might be able to come back for the Red Bulls game, if not the following week. And then Jack DeVries, who's been in concussion protocol for what seems like a year now, is obviously still in there and is unavailable to play. Score prediction wise, I think we might see the likes of Powell and Burke play on Saturday, so Curtin perhaps can give some more rest to the likes of Bizo and maybe Casper or Sergio, because they're going to have to take on the brunt of the load heading into Gold Cup period. I'm going to piggyback off Sam's optimism. I'm going to say 1-0 Union. I think we could probably see a Shibirko or good. Daniel Gazdag scored his first Union goal on his first start.
Okay, you heard it here first. Gazdag scoring his first MLS goal. Dave Miller at 9:03 p.m. Eastern time called it. There we go. So we'll look back on that for the next show. No, but I think you guys are spot on. Personally, we talked about this with Chicago. We wanted to see at least a point out of, on the road, which is what you always want to see in the MLS. You always want to see a point on the road. But the problem is you don't want to see a 3-3 point on the road. You want to see a low-scoring game from your defense. So because of the recent amount of goals that they've let into the net, I'll be happy with a 1-1. I'll even be happy with a 0-0 draw. I want to see at least a defense put out a performance in a tougher environment and say, yeah, we're still a dominant defensive force. We can still make sure we keep the goalie with the clean sheet, or at least with only one up. So I think 1-1, 1-0 is exactly what I'm looking for. If they lose, at least make it 1-0. Don't make it a blowout, because that's not what you want to have currently. With how they've kind of been playing a little bit iffy of late. But yeah, and in the prediction for the lineup, Dave, you mentioned Reese about the change in possibly Powell being there. I really want to see Bedoya back in there. He is not the best player on the field, without question, but he is so important with leading the team and being the voice out there and controlling the pace of the game. So I really, if anything, I want to see Bedoya at least get a half in it, and hopefully he's playing at a high level. But before we go to the Western Conference, I know Sam has stuff about, to talk about the Western Conference. Any other thoughts on Nashville before we continue? No, I think we're good to go. Okay, so Sam, Western Conference, what are your thoughts on those teams, or anything that kind of stands out?
Yeah, so Western Conference is the Union don't play in the Western Conference, which is sounds like an easy thing to do. So it's easy to forget exactly what goes on there.
Yeah, forgotten conference.
But as Dave said earlier, they have 13 teams. Now, maths isn't my strong point, but even I know that if you have 13 teams in a conference, that means that one team's not going to be playing every week. And this week at the Colorado, was it Colorado Rapids this week? I don't think they played. I don't think it's sustainable. I don't like it, that's for sure. It seems off to give a team a week off every week. Obviously you have intra-conference games as well, which kind of make it a little bit fairer. But if you're in the Western Conference, you've got an odd number of teams. It's very strange. It's one of the weirdest parts of the MLS, I think, for me, is that if you look at every other league in Europe, they have an even number of teams. But I suppose it's very. I suppose that gets tallied up next year, though. Who's joining next year? Is it Charlotte?
Oh, yes, it is Charlotte. They had their logo come out. It was not very great, but I'm sure they'll put out. But actually, speaking of logos, I like Austin's logo. And Matthew McConaughey is their owner, and he's been very involved with them. But that's another team in the Western Conference that is, is at the bottom of the table at the moment. But interesting. But yeah, go ahead, Sam. Any thoughts on that particular squad out there?
Yeah. So, ironically enough, I've been following the Earthquakes a lot. Okay. Because they're utterly miserable. Last week they lost 5-0 to Orlando. We said earlier Orlando a good team, but they looked just devoid of any ideas. I was meant to be on last week, but sadly the joys of internet failed me. I had a beautiful rant about Orlando, the Orlando match, where they just gave up. Now, one of my pet hates in any sport is if you go a goal down or 2 goals down, you don't give up. But that's exactly what the FAs have done now in 2 consecutive weeks. They lost 5-0 last week. On the last weekend, they lost 3-1 to Galaxy. And I just don't understand what's going on there. The managers, Almeida, I don't know what he was thinking. It's very strange. I've watched the Earthquakes a lot. I've watched Chicago Fire a lot, and I watched the Whitecaps this weekend. I think the first time actually. And these are all 3 teams down the tail end of the Western Conference.
Yep.
But the Earthquakes for me they played the worst football. And if there was relegation, God forbid for the Earthquakes, I think they'd probably try a bit more, but they just sort of gave up.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, the Union played San Jose, I think 2 years ago, and they had like a come from behind win against, or a draw against. And if Eric is still watching, I'm sure he'll chime in because he probably knows exactly what game I'm talking about. But yeah, there's the bottom feeders are pretty bad overall. Vancouver's one that's struggled for sure. But Seattle, Kansas City, LA, obviously are closer to the top of the table. Dave, anything that you've noticed from any of those top level squads or any of the team out there?
I mean, obviously, as I'd said beforehand, the Western Conference is sort of the forgotten conference personally for me. I sort of focus more on the Eastern Conference because that's the directly impacts the Union. Obviously.
There we go. See, I remember. Yes. Okay. Eric nailed it. So Wanda was in the stands shirtless with the fans, and they were going crazy because they were winning, and then we completely just ripped his heart out. But go ahead, Dave.
I was going to say, obviously, it's sort of the forgotten conference. It's what sort of I sort of focus more on the Union games of the Eastern Conference because there's direct impact on the Union. Obviously, Sam's relayed to me that from what he's seen from San Jose, it's been pretty dire so far. I just want to quickly go back to Nashville, obviously, as we dive it off in a different. Obviously, with Charlotte coming in next season, this is probably going to be the only year that the Union have Nashville in their conference. Nashville will probably head back off to the Western Conference next year, with obviously Charlotte playing in the Eastern Conference. That's fine. I was working my head. There'll be an even number of teams. It's fine. It's good. That's good.
Yeah.
I mean, but again, look at the Western Conference. Obviously, you've got your big guns. You've got your LA Galaxy. Obviously, FC Dallas. Obviously, one of the better teams, but they're sort of similar to the Union, where they've created a lot of very good academy players. But the one team that's perhaps shocked me in the Western Conference has been Portland. Obviously, they won the MLS Back Cup last year. They're quite well known for being a pretty good team. Obviously, they've struggled a bit this year. Obviously, it's been well documented their injury issues for the Union game. Didn't have the best time in the CONCACAF Champions League. That's a team perhaps worth watching out for heading into the CONCACAF sort of area of the season and later into the summer.
Yeah, it's weird. I'm looking at the table now. You're right. I forget about the Western Conference. It really doesn't affect us too much, but they have 5 losses already, only 1 draw and 4 wins. They have 13 points. They're currently in 7th place in the West, below Houston. You think of Portland, you think of success, you think of a strong, tough team to play, and right now they are far from it, right in the middle of the pack in the West. But I guess in a situation where we do, as a Union fan, want to reach the MLS Cup final, we want to play a Western Conference team to get that trophy. If we make it that far, what is the team that is most dangerous or most likely to make it to play against Union if we were to reach that level?
That's a good question. It is a good question in terms of the who do you not want to face in terms of the fact our defense is a little bit leaky. I think Galaxy would be pretty tough.
Yeah.
And I think Seattle are a good team. Yeah. You'd want to probably avoid them. I haven't seen much of Kansas City. I'm not going to lie. That's another thing. I take an annoyance with. Is that Kansas City, I would rather be told, is not in Kansas.
That's right. It's in Missouri.
But this
There's two Kansas Cities.
Yes, but this Kansas City is in Kansas.
Yeah.
It's so confusing. But I haven't seen much of them, and I don't know. I don't know much about Kansas, but I know if I was a Union fan, I would not want to play Seattle.
Yeah, we've lost to Seattle and Kansas City in the Open Cup previously, so I have a strong disdain for both squads on a personal level. But Seattle just always finds a way to be really freaking good. I think one year when they actually ended up winning the MLS Cup, they started off pretty rough in the beginning of the year, and I can't remember the year. I apologize now, but they have the culture to always find a way to get themselves back, which is kind of goes back to Portland. Why I'm surprised that they haven't risen a little bit farther in the table. They do have a track record of being good. But Dave, any particular team that you like right now? I don't want to play if I'm the Union.
Again, Seattle Sounders, obviously, but very much like the Seahawks. It must be a Seattle thing. They're literally the epitome of consistency. They're always good. They always get positive results.
Yeah.
Again, as you said, obviously, I don't think I'd want to play it. Maybe late into the postseason, if Portland get there, I think they'd be a very dangerous team. Yeah. Obviously, they beat the last time the Union played Portland in a high stakes game. Portland got the better of the Union, so maybe the cloud of doubt there from the MLS Cup, the flashbacks of that. But I think those are probably the two teams. I think obviously Portland, going to have a big second half of the season.
Sam, one of our final questions for you regarding the West. Are you surprised at all by LAFC only having 12 points and being farther down the table, considering they are a higher market team that is pushed as one of the top level teams in the MLS to watch?
I am and I'm not. LA is rare in MLS now. It's a city with two teams.
Yeah.
And again, this might have absolutely no bearing on how a team performs. But when you're in such close proximity to your opponents, your rivals, there's a tendency to sort of overtly focus on them and then not focus on that. I think that's what LAFC have done. You look at Galaxy; they've been a class above them, and it's a tricky one. I am surprised. Yeah, going into the season, I thought that the top few teams would be the two teams from LA and Seattle. Mm-hmm. So I'm quite surprised they've fallen off the pace so quickly as well. We're about halfway through the regular season. And, they're nowhere really. They're not where they need to be.
No, they're ninth, 12 points. They have 3 wins, 3 draws, and 4 losses. They're absolutely a middle of the pack kind of 500 club. But you're right. You see that with the Clippers and the Lakers. Other cities have 2 teams: Chicago, the White Sox, and the Cubs. It's sometimes you unfairly compare the 2 teams, even though they might be different, conferences or whatever. But Dave, how about yourself? Any thoughts on LAFC being kind of where they're at?
I mean, obviously, considering if I'm correct, they came the first year they're in the league. They won the MLS. They won the entire MLS Cup, didn't they?
I don't remember right now. I want to say maybe. I have to go back here. I don't pay attention to the Western Conference that much, as you can see. You can look that up.
I know. I'm pretty sure they came in as soon as they came into the league. They had a pretty big immediate impact. Obviously, they struggled last year as well. So. But I'm pretty sure they won in their first year. The MLS is back. The MLS Cup.
The second year they won both the conference and the everything.
That's it, yeah.
Okay.
But even then, they came third in the conference in their first year. So they've somewhat been known from their short history as a team that lives for success. So again, I'm shocked that they're doing so poorly. But they've got a proven player at this level like Carlos Vela.
Yeah, absolutely.
But again, I'm very shocked to see them down there. But again, they came 7th last year. Maybe they've struggled with not having fans in the stadium, not having the LA crowd behind them. Obviously, Sam as well. There's obviously some big games coming up this weekend as well, not just the Union. Are there any games that perhaps we should be looking out for, not just from a Union perspective, but an entertainment perspective as well?
Yeah, so I've already said about New England and Columbus. That's a big match in Eastern Conference. Especially when the Union play Nashville. In terms of the other one, it might be interesting. DC United, not a huge fan of them either. It must be said. They're away to second last place, Toronto, and we'll be hoping for a little bit of an upset there. I think. In terms of the Western Conference, because I am annoyingly quite a fan of the Western Conference. You've got a big match at the top of the table there. You got Kansas City against the Galaxy. That'll go a long way. If I was a Seattle fan, I'd be sort of rubbing my hands with glee, I think, at that point. And then one thing I love about the MLS is just the geography of it. The longest trip for any fan in England is about 300 odd miles. Now, the longest trip here, you've got Vancouver traveling to Dallas. Now, that's a hell of a trip for fans.
I would say so. It's a long car ride.
I think that's probably only beaten by if Vancouver were playing in Florida. But you look at the matches next week. I think definitely the Kansas City Galaxy one's one that I've got my eye on. And then of course in the Eastern Conference, you've got to hope that New England slip up, and I think they might do against Columbus.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I definitely keep an eye on those games. And you mentioned DC United and Toronto. Toronto's another team that has a high caliber, high reputation. Mm-hmm. They are way down there with 5 points. So it's DC United, another team that I know is at 8th place right now with 13 points. So a win from Toronto would certainly help the Unions, just pushing them further down the table, kind of keeping them out of the way there. But yeah, those are excellent games, and I think the New England Columbus one in particular is one that we absolutely have to keep an eye on as a Union fan to see where we fall on the table after that match. Any other thoughts or anything from Dave that you want to ask Sam before we wrap up the show?
Absolutely not. I just researched the distance. Obviously, driving by car would take 34 hours to drive from Vancouver to Dallas.
You only got to stop at least 3 times,
3 or 4 times,
and just keep on driving. Have some
get a hotel.
Yeah,
I was going to say that the longest journey here is Plymouth to Carlisle, wasn't it, Sam?
Yeah, Plymouth to Carlisle, Plymouth to Sunderland. It's one like that. Yeah,
one of those.
That's probably what an 8-hour trip.
8 hours. Yeah, 8 hours up, 8 hours down.
Yeah.
No, that's by car though, driving, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So for us, it'd be all plane. So let's say if a Western, if the LA Rams want to play the Eagles, it's a 6.5-hour flight, 6-hour flight.
Yeah.
And that is week by week. The Rams will play in Philly, then they're going to go to Jacksonville, then go back to Seattle. It's a weird geographical thing. Certainly plays a disadvantage for the traveling team in the MLS and any sport in particular for the United States. It's very tricky, which is why there's no Alaska or Hawaii teams.
It's travel's always been a part of football, but especially in the Western Conference, some of the trips these teams are making, even Portland to Vancouver is a hell of a trip. Let know the others, and we've seen during the I'm not sure if you followed the Euros much, over here in Europe, Mike, but some teams have been all over the shop. I think Wales, who are my adopted nation, they ended up going back and forth to the Far East.
Azerbaijan,
yeah, they went to Azerbaijan, to Italy, back to Azerbaijan, back to the Netherlands. So, that's a hell of a trip, and you could see it. By the 4th game, they were tired. They were lethargic. They were they were not very good at retaining the ball, certainly. So I think travel's a huge, and especially in a COVID world as well. You've got so many protocols to get through. It takes it out of you.
No, I think you've seen it already in the intra-conference games this season. Obviously, when the Union played Portland.
Oh, yeah. And
obviously, I've said it to Mike before, it's the hardest thing to do in the MLS to win away from home because there's so many different variables that you don't get with England. Obviously, you've got to deal with the travel, you've got to deal with the difference of the climate, obviously the sea level, sea level as well. Obviously, places like Denver, it's so difficult to, Colorado, it's so difficult to obviously adjust to the running and everything. I think, obviously going a bit off topic, but Bolivia, I think is probably one of the hardest places to play in the world. They say because it's so high above sea level, you can't breathe. And I think you see it with the American games as well. And the US national team plays in the qualifiers. Teams like Mexico, Honduras, they deliberately move these matches when they play America to these high altitude places because they know the American team won't be able to deal with it. I think you see that at a smaller level. You see that impact here in the MLS.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And the Union are fortunate because teams like New England, Columbus, NYCFC, the Red Bulls, DC, they're all a very short flight away. It really does not take long to get to any of those cities for the Union. So they're fortunate being where they're at. The majority of their teams that they're playing are within a short, 2-hour plane ride. And, they went to Chicago the day of, and they just took a quick flight over, and they were there in no time. So absolutely, the travel is a huge part of things. But Sam, we're going to wrap up the show here. It was great to have you on. I appreciate you staying up late. I hope you take another nap tomorrow, please. Dave, you as well. But it was absolutely great to have you. Can you give us, where can our fans follow you or find you on Twitter?
Oh, I'm everywhere on Twitter. I'm on Twitter at Santali99. It's my Twitter's a bit of a mess. It's got a bit of everything. It's got a bit of politics. It's got a bit of football. Quite a lot of anger against England.
Eurovision.
Eurovision as well. Oh yeah, Eurovision. You're gonna love. That's a whole separate podcast. No, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me on.
Yeah, it was great talking to you, and I hope we have you on again soon and get to chat with you and hear what you think of the Union again, maybe further on to the season for sure.
I was going to say quickly before we move on to the quickly before we go on to the ads and everything. Next week, the Union players we mentioned earlier in the podcast they play during our time slot for the podcast. So after the press conference is over with Jim Curtin, me and Mike will hopefully be able to jump on and quickly do a post-game reaction show, which will be 30-35 minutes at the most to go over the game. If you guys want to come in and talk and discuss the show, feel free to. Sam, obviously, your invite's open to you as well.
Yeah, it's a Red Bull, so there's going to be a lot of emotion. So hopefully it's a positive emotion and not an angry emotion, because otherwise we're going to have to watch the PG-13 comments coming through against the Red Bulls. But, exactly. So we'll keep you posted, guys, online to see how we're going to approach next week's Thursday night game. But, obviously, all about the birds. We have some great sponsors on deck. So we're going to start with Manscaped. You want to get the man in your life the perfect gift. Well, get him the Manscaped Lawnmower 4.0. You heard that right, the Lawnmower 4.0. Get 20% off plus free shipping with the code AATBirds at manscaped.com. Imagine surprising your man with a sleek, well-designed, and optimized body hair trimmer that says, your balls will thank you. That's 20% off with free shipping at manscaped.com using code AATBirds. Next is OddsJam. OddsJam is the #1 software platform from Sportsbook Bandits. Their software shows you how to make risk-free cash off FanDuel, DraftKings, and any other book you can think of with the arbitrage calculator. Never lose a bet again. Sign up today at oddsjam.com via AATBirds, which you can see way down there below the link. Statement Games. Check out Statement Games for a fun new way to fantasy sports and entertainment. Win gift cards or prizes, and it's completely free to sign up. Costs $0. It's a great place to go to get your fix for fantasy sports. Sign up at statementgames.com, which again you can also see down there on the link below in the banner. Next, 99jerseys.com. Get 20% off all your next orders by using discount code AATBirds20. Check out the website. Selection of quality kick-ass jerseys of your favorite sports, movie characters, throwback jerseys, and some of your favorite stars. Again, order today. 99jerseys.com. Save 20% off by using discount code AATBirds. And last but not least, we have us, the All About the Birds shop. Get your across the pitch gear and all of the All About the Birds network gear from all of our shows. It's right over there. That shirt that just popped up on the screen. I got it from my dad for Father's Day, and he likes it. So that was a win for me. The last thing is the social media. Please follow, subscribe, and all of the social media platforms we have: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. You missed the show, Apple Podcast has it, where you can watch on all those platforms as well. There's a tons of way to get yourself back and on track and catch up with all your favorite shows. So please give us a follow and a like, and we'll be happy to answer any comments or questions for the next show as well. But for everything that wraps us up here, a big shout out to our producer, Mike Devlin, Mike Devlin12 at Twitter. He is the backbone for this, makes everything go, makes us all look good on the screen. Sam, thank you again for having us. Dave.
Thank you, Sam.
Again, go get some rest now. I appreciate talking with you, and we'll talk soon. Go Union, guys.
Go Union.
Go Union.